Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Tuesday Talks Out of the Shadows, Black Families with Autism Speaks Out. I am Kim Riley, your host and founder of the Transition Academy, Disability College and Career Planning Center. We can no longer go along to get along. We can't ignore the obvious differences that race plays out within the disability community. It's time to have a long overdue discussion about the very different America that white people with autism live in versus the experiences of Black people with autism and other invisible disabilities. I am going to go ahead and share my screen with the presentation. Sorry. These last few weeks have been trying as the entire world witnessed America continue to grapple with our legacy of racism in its most brutal form. The murder of George Floyd at the hands of a police officer, while 3 other officers stood guard, exposed how systems meant to protect the American people are intentionally flawed with fatal consequences. As companies and organizations around the country have issued damning statements condemning racism, the autism community's largest advocacy organization issued tepid responses. And so I have put screenshots of the responses and the official statements and some of the responses of those followers on the Autism Society of America and the Autism Speaks page and on their Facebook pages. And so the Autism Society of America, which is the largest autism and oldest autism advocacy organization in the country, issued probably the most tone-deaf statement that I know left me speechless. They made a statement on civil rights, not racism, and they talked about standing in solidarity with peaceful protesters, and they talked about civil and human rights. And within that, there were overwhelmingly positive likes, but there were also those who equated protesters and looters in the same vein. And then when we got to Autism Speaks, a much more direct statement about racism and discrimination. But definitely, I know as a member of both organizations, I wanted, a special, just a sentiment, a reach out to our Black families, and that wasn't captured in either organization statement. And even within the Autism Speaks more direct, poignant statement, there were those who said, who watered down the issue and said, well, everyone experiences police brutality and is made fun of and abused it. And I'm like, wow, such a slap in the face. And then also there's always the Pollyannas who talk about, well, my child is colorblind, and if everyone lived in this, Disney world like us, then the world would be a better place. And so this is the backdrop that Black families live in. This is how the nation's largest autism organizations are leading this fight. And that kind of brings me to the very harsh reality that we as Black families navigate every day. We live in two very different worlds. We live in the Black world, and then we live in the autism, the disability space. And on the one hand, within the Black community, that's home. That's our families, those are our churches, that's our community. We have a shared experience of being detached from our homeland, Africa, as well as the legacy of slavery, of Jim Crow. And so when we see George Floyd, there's a very real pain that we experience because it is what our ancestors have historically experienced. Then there is the autism and disability world that we live in. And I want to just say that in this world, my brothers and sisters in the autism and disability world are amazing. I cannot tell you how much hope you all have given me, the love that you give me, the fact that I can have a conversation with my brothers and sisters in this autism disability space that no one else on the planet um, understands. And I can really just kind of share, and I can feel a connection in a way that I can't feel with someone who is not impacted by autism disability, even if we are connected by race. And so these are the two very real worlds that I live in and other Black families live in. It's kind of a dance that we've danced for far too long. And so in the autism disability space, I bring Kim, but I leave my Blackness at home out of fear that it's going to muddy the waters and that it's going to um, is going to cause tension when I desperately need that connection and that friendship. So let's all vow to get comfortable being uncomfortable. We're going to go there today, and we're going to, we as Black families, we're going to share what it's like to live as a person with a disability in these yet to be United States of America. So I want to start things off with some of our amazing parents. And I want to also kind of give a little insight, more insight as to what it's like to be Black in America. One of the things that we as Black families do not share with our white friends is the talk that we have with our children, especially our Black boys. Usually, when young people get a driver's license, it's a rites of passage. We're all excited. We're also, as parents, kind of a little taken back because we can't believe this time is here. And we remember when they were little and how can they be driving? Well, Black parents, we have a different response. It is a moment of reckoning. We now have to sit our Black sons down and tell them what to do when, not if, but when they are stopped by the police. Keep your both hands on the steering wheel. Say, yes, officer, no, officer. When they ask you for your driver's license, tell them, officer, I am now reaching for my license. Do not just suddenly reach for it. Officer, I am now reaching for my auto insurance. Do not suddenly reach for them. and we coach them through this process. We tell them, do not get baited into an argument and lose your temper, because I need you to come home to me alive. And then once you get home, let's tackle it together. These are conversations that we have always had with our Black boys, these rites of passages. And but as you can see by this picture, we're having to have these conversations younger and younger. And we can no longer have the conversation and end it with, this is what you do so you can come home to me alive, because we can't even give our boys or our children any assurance that they're going to make it home to us alive. And so we are coming to work every day with this heavy burden that our children or the men that we love or any person that we love could suddenly, viciously be taken from us, and there is not a thing that we can do about it. This is the legacy of racism and police brutality within the Black community. And it is definitely exacerbated by 100,000,000% when you add disability into the picture. And so this is the backdrop that parents are raising Black boys, especially in. And so I have three moms who are going to share what it is like to raise their Black sons with autism in today's highly charged environment. First off, Denise Dillard of Kansas City, who, because she is my friend, I reached out to her last night and said, Denise, I really need you to speak on this. And she said, Kim, I'll do anything you ask me to. Denise is going to share what it is like raising her son, who is not only driving, but he is definitely a young adult out of high school. We have Shalon Cubic, who is my cousin from Miami, who I also called yesterday and said, cousin, I need you to share your experience. And she said, I'm going to kind of rearrange some things and rush around, and I'll be there. So she's sitting on the deck with those palm trees in the background, making us all jealous here. Thank you, cousin, for coming. And then we have Antoinetta Kenyon of North Carolina. Antoinetta, thank you so much for joining us. She is the mom of a 15-year-old son with autism, and she is going to share her experience. Denise, would you care to start us out talking about sharing with us about your son driving and other experiences?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having me this morning. Thank you, Kim. With me is my husband, John. I asked him to sit in with us this morning because I thought it was very important for us to sit together and have this conversation. So, let me give you a little history, very brief history about our son. Our son's name is Julian. Julian is now 19 years old. He has autism, he has ADHD, and he also has a condition called oppositional defiancy disorder. I know we call that just being a teenager, but it's more than that when you are a person with a disability like autism and ADHD. So with him, it's that every time you say something, he has to say something. He has to rebut. He has to. So Julian started driving officially at the age of 18. So it was basically last year that we had to start having these conversations with Julian. The rawness of the conversation in our household is the personal experience that his dad had to share with Julian about growing up poor in some of Kansas City's least economically fertile areas, where when he had encounters with the police, it was boots to the head. It was common for what we saw Mr. Floyd go through, but worse. So with Julian, at the same time that he had made these milestones and was driving and being a productive, contributing human being to this world, um, we were telling Julian about independence, but then we also had to tell Julian, as you said, Kim, about when he's driving and if he's pulled over by the police or anything, any emergency type circumstances or traffic violation, the right moves to make, which is even more difficult for him because of the underlying issues. Julian is 275 pounds, 6 feet tall. He's a sugar bear, uh, harmless to anyone. But in the middle of the night, in the darkness, in areas he's not familiar with, as he's just going out trying to do whatever it is we've given him permission to do, um, I am always afraid. I am always scared that my son may not come home simply because of the skin he's in, and more so because of the disabilities that he has that are unseen to the naked eye. So if he were to catch an officer late at night, 11, 12 o'clock, officer's tired, and Julian gets pulled over and he's speaking to Julian and Julian says something back, or Julian doesn't remember the rules that we put in place for him, there is that situation. It can happen to him. Julian did get in a automobile accident at night, and by the grace of God and the answer to my prayers, he encountered an officer that was very kind to him, that was very patient with him, who, when I got there and observed this officer, I was just amazed at who he was and how he handled my son. So much so that when that situation was over, I'd written to the Independence Police Department on behalf of that officer and sent that officer a card to let him know just how impactful his behavior with my son was to us, because this had been our fear, that his first experience might be his last. With that, we vowed to share our voices, and we did things such as this that Kim is asking us to do. I've become a participating member of PLTI, which is a training institute to allow parents to become advocates for their children. And oddly enough, back in October of last year, my project for that program was bringing awareness to officers and EMTs and just people, period, of individuals who are high functioning, who are trying to just become contributing members of society, and the risk that they confront on a daily basis, especially if they are Black. Not knowing that 6 months later, we would be here. And so now, with all that we've poured into Julian, and Julian is seeing firsthand what can happen, I have to now retract and really be careful about his movement, because now I have to tell him about, yes, you're independent. You should have the right to move about freely and do whatever it is you're going to do. But I really got to be more conscious of where you're going. And I put trackers on his phone so that if something happens, then I would get that alert. And if he can't call me, I can get there. I have been blazing these trails for Julian since he was diagnosed at a late age of 11. And now I'm in a helpless place because he's a young adult. He's 19 going on 15, and he's out there in the world. So I have to use technology to help me possibly thwart off a situation where he may not come back. So this is the reality of our world.
Denise, John, would you like to share anything about being a dad and raising your son to be a man in today's racially charged and historically our racial charged reality?
Absolutely. Just a short brief. I am a military vet, so I used the military to escape my economic situation coming up. As a kid, I never thought about joining the military. So 10 years in the military has taught me some discipline, and it actually, the discipline I've been taught sometimes makes it a little difficult as a man raising a young man that challenges you on a lot of things. And fortunate, as far as conversations, like my wife, like Denise said, he's always got a rebuttal on anything you say. And his big thing is, I know, Dad, I know. He knows everything, but he really doesn't. And so it makes it challenging sometimes. Fortunately, with me and Denise, his whole life, we've always been able to tag team. And when one gets enough or gets fed up, and we observe that, we kind of tag, you're it. You get to deal with that. But unfortunately, the officers and the public do not have that. Do not have that ability. They don't necessarily understand that he's just being him, and it makes it tough and scary for us.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much to John and Denise. I want to also reach out to Shalon in Miami. Can you share your experiences?
Absolutely. First, let me say thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, albeit last minute, but I got you. So I am the mother. My son is Garrett. He is 16, going on 25. If you hear him tell it, um, he is very much like Julian in that he has a rebuttal for every statement. He knows everything, but Garrett does not connect the things that are really happening as being, being a personal sort of connection. Garrett understands and he sees the news and he sees what happened to George Floyd, and he sees what happens to, other African Americans, and even Trayvon Martin. Garrett wears his hoodie every day. We are here in Florida. We just recently, last year, we relocated from Kansas City, Missouri, where we lived in the Northland in Kansas City, went to Park Hill South High School. And so Garrett has always lived in a very mixed community. That is a blessing and a curse all unto itself. A blessing because, from a schooling standpoint, he's had wonderful educational opportunities that really have made a huge difference in his life, in his personal abilities, in his ability to, academically make strides and even grow, with his day-to-day life. A curse because it's a community that does not understand African American young men. It's a community that is not forgiving to African American young men. On top of that, that Garrett has autism, that he has something to say about just about everything, and that he truly does not understand the world inner working of, the police and what his place is and what their place is. That can be, frankly, a dangerous combination. We've now moved here we're in South Florida, so we are in a suburb right outside of Miami, also very much mimics the suburb that we were in before. Yes, there are African American young men who are here, but by and large, he is outnumbered, 5-1 at least. We also don't know the climate down here. We know what we see on the news. We know that, Black and brown people disproportionately are being arrested, are harassed by the police. So that's what we know. But there is no comfort for me here in this space that we are at. And now with the current climate, with the racially charged climate that we've been in, that has just consistently escalated over the past 4 years, we're in new territory because Garrett he would like to be more independent. I share Denise's sentiment. We have the trackers on his cell phone as well, so that I know where he is. He would love to drive. That scares me to death because, we've had the conversation of what happens when the police stop you, even walking in our neighborhood. Him going out for a walk by himself gives me anxiety because at any moment, a police officer who doesn't understand someone who has autism, who doesn't understand someone who has that need to respond, right or wrong, he will come upon that one officer. And that could be his last opportunity to come upon that officer. And even though I can see him on the GPS and I know exactly where he is, I don't know and can't diffuse that situation on his behalf. So what we have done is really talk to Garrett about him having autism. And we've talked to him about, if you don't understand a command that an officer is giving you or someone who you encounter is giving you, let them know I have autism. I'm not completely understanding what you're saying. I have autism. Not that the shield of autism is going to protect him completely, but my hope is that people have encountered, they've encountered people in their life who at some point had autism. And so maybe a sense of empathy will kick in, and that will be his saving grace in that moment.
Thank you.
So he's all about the driving and the going and the doing. And my husband, who is his stepfather, we've been married for 7 years, and we continually have those discussions. He will connect himself with other Black men who are in these situations and who have been brutalized, and that will make a difference, and he'll make a different decision.
Thank you. Antoinetta,
Yeah.
would you like to share your experiences?
Yes. So, greetings, everyone. I have a son. His name is Kelby. He'll be 15 at the end of the month. And he is very much like everyone else. I had him diagnosed late at 11, and mainly because we were unschooled. So he was at home with me until 7th grade. And for him, that has been a little bit challenging. So social issues, he's still in therapy for social awkwardness. He actually started getting friends 8th grade. So people know him. The school has worked well with me in regards to making sure that he is getting the best he can get. And for me, that is what I'm still here for, because I live with family. We're surrounded in the country. It's a small town, maybe about 13,000 people. So our family name still holds some weight here. So when they hear his name, they kind of have an idea of who his people are. And it's kind of mixed. It's a majority white school district, but he fits in well because it's about the things he likes. He's into tech, he's into gaming, he's into, things that other kids his age may not be into, but that's what he does best. And so he knows what's going on in the world. However, he's very slightly disconnected because it's not right in his face. However, he's aware. So I have another year. He'll be maybe getting his permit this year. He's kind of not ready to drive. He's thought about it. So he might be a delayed driver like Denise's son, where he just doesn't want to go out there just yet. But I still have to think about, do I need to put a sticker on his window? Do I need to put a bumper sticker on the back of the car? Do I need to put a sticker on the back of his license? But none of that matters if they're not checking your ID, if the car's not registered in his name. They may pull up and ask for his ID before he gets to the car. With Texas being the only state that does have, where they can put an autism, decal on the license, like an organ donor. It's like, well, what does that look like? If they don't run a background check with the license, what will they pull up? So I have my concerns, but I try not to worry too much because, like everyone said, it's about, laying a foundation, making them aware, and really allowing them the chance to breathe and be a person. At the same time, still understanding that, your skin color can get you in trouble with things that your peers may not. And my son is B15, and he's almost 6'4", 230. He's a goofy kid, but you won't know that unless you approach him. And he does have a central auditory processing disorder where he can hear you, but it may not process the way everyone else. So it takes him a little bit longer to determine exactly what you're saying and how you're saying or why you're saying it and how it relates to him. So those are some things that we're looking into. The closer he gets to more independence. Right now, he has friends. However, he doesn't really leave the house too much outside of school activities. Well, when school was still in session. So it's the learning curve as we set this foundation up for him to be more independent, because he wants to go to school out of state. And I have to be aware of the climate in other areas. Texas, Georgia, Massachusetts. These are places where, racial division is still prevalent, even though it may not be discussed unless you have those, outliers where it makes the news.
Wow. Thank you, Antoinetta.
You're welcome.
Okay. And thank you to all of our amazing moms. Wanted to switch gears a little bit just to show you how really hungry Black families are to connect, to have a sacred space. I wanted to talk with Matrice Gandy. Matrice is the founder and executive director of MindWorks Collaborative. She had the vision of bringing together people of color who are in the therapist and special educator space. And so she was focusing strictly on that professional development and just support services for those individuals. And but Baltimore charter schools had a different vision. They said, hey, can you connect with our families, our Black and Brown families during COVID who desperately need a sense of community? And so she unwittingly began bringing together 200 Black and Brown families in charter schools in Baltimore who were still reeling from COVID, but are now dealing with the aftermath of the protests. And just like the rest of Black families, we are dealing with a pandemic within the pandemic. So Matrice, could you share a little bit about the work that you're doing and the challenges that you all are trying to overcome in Baltimore?
Yeah, hi everybody. I want to put in that we are not based in Baltimore. We are based in Maryland.
Oh, I'm
But
sorry, that's right.
yeah. Some of our team is in Baltimore, but our organization is more nationwide. But our offices are based in Maryland. So our, like Kim was alluding to, through our work with schools and with educators directly, we learned a lot and heard a lot of requests for schools to be supported with connecting their families of students with disabilities, and like making sure we're getting them the resources that they needed. And so we just kind of casually started the Facebook group for some parents, and like Kim said, like within a weekend, we had like over 200 families that had like signed up and wanted to engage and kind of have these type of conversations around how do we support our students, our babies during this COVID situation. And obviously it has taken a slightly turn with this additional kind of, like Kim said, a pandemic with addressing the police brutality, and like how do we tell this story to our students with disabilities? How do we tell this story to the professionals that work with these students? How do I make sure as a parent that when my ABA therapist is working with my kid, or with his transition, his transition specialist is working with my student, that like, yeah, like it's okay, and like want you to have those conversations around as a Black or brown child with a disability, like the world might perceive you in this way, they might perceive your behaviors in this way, and this training that we need to give to you, this training, this social skills training, or like this life skills training that we're trying to provide you, is to like really help you live in this type of environment, but also giving those students some type of agency around like, here's how you can kind of lead change in your local communities. This is how you can kind of push your service providers to think about certain things. And so really trying to support families as they kind of are navigating all of this at the same time. Some of our discussions, I found it really interesting that all three parents were really noting their concerns around like their child having to necessarily say something back, or establish themselves as like smart, incredible, and thinking human beings, particularly to their parents, but to other folks in authority positions. And as a organization that predominantly focuses on supporting educators, it's like really helping us to it's really informative for helping us to think about like how we're supporting families and students with like, yes, there's a time and a place for everything, and like we want you to live, and your parents want you to live, and so these are the things that we're going to be helping you do as you move into adulthood. This is like what you have to do to become independent. Kim opened up this session with kind of the post from these major autism communities, but in the pre-call that I had with Kim, I was sharing with her, is not just in those autism societies, just the ability community as a whole, like we're really struggling with having to balance like, oh, this is a scientific process. Like I'm a school psychologist, like we talk about this, we process this way, and then we get this outcome, and we do, X, Y happens, and then, Z follows. And that's not necessarily true for every student. And that's not necessarily true for every student based on these things that a lot of folks in the ability community want to kind of ignore, which is race. Like it's a very touchy subject for a lot of these, especially like these really big organizations who are predominantly ran by folks who aren't impacted by this story, who are, this is not even the population of practitioners that are in this space. 80% of our special education and like ability practitioners are white women. Like they are overwhelmingly not in this, and they're not having this experience. And so how do we support families in advocating and elevating their voices so that way these big organizations that are ran by people who look like them don't have the same experiences as them and their children? How do we make sure their voices are more elevated and so their concerns are taken more seriously? And the field as a whole can begin to shift and move and be more inclusive of these types of situations.
Thank you, Matrice. I now want to give a shout out to my white friends who have reached out and said, Kim, I'm thinking about you and Kendall. I can't imagine what you're going through. I'm so sorry. Let's talk. I don't know what to do, but I want to do something. I want to share a recording by a white autistic male on how to be a white ally. His name is Steve Aspel, and he had some really powerful and poignant words speaking of his experiences and a message for white people who really condemn racism in all forms and want to be an ally. So I'm going to play his recording now. Can you all hear that?
No, ma'am.
You can't hear
No.
it? Okay. This is where my limited technology skills come into play. He also, yes.
If you share your screen with the video and then
Okay.
hit share sound in that share screen, like where it says share audio, then it should you should be able to
Okay,
hear
share computer sound.
it.
Thank you, Matrice. See, that's why I hang with fancy people like you. Okay, here we go.
So do you want to be a white ally during the Black Lives Matter movement? I'm going to stop you right there. This is not a temporary gig. If you want to be an ally, you must first own up to the fact that you have had and always will have a relationship with racism, with benefits. No amount of performative allyship will ever exempt you from racism because there is no wokeness award and it's not a one-way street. And let me be clear, this is not about you. Yes, I'm talking to you, social media influencers who put up a motivational message and a hashtag to show your support. I'm definitely talking to you, congressional Democrats who take a knee and wear kente cloth for the cameras in honor of George Floyd. This is not how to be an ally. Being an ally is about realizing the many moments in your life which, despite being disabled, gay, poor, whatever, whiteness has given you an advantage. The fact that your workplace overlooks resumes with black-sounding names, that seeing a black man walking around in your neighborhood is unusual enough that it gives you pause, that black authors get paid less than their white counterparts, and that young black illustrators get turned down because their work isn't mainstream enough. These are only a few examples of white privilege. Here's a better one. For context, I am a white autistic male. Because I struggle with empathy, I cannot easily put myself in another one's shoes, so to speak. I have no idea what it's like to be anyone but myself, but I do have compassion and a sense of justice, so I work with what I know. I know what it feels like to be on the margins, to be seen with suspicion, to lose a loved one, to have panic attacks and autistic meltdowns. I know what it's like to be afraid, to be both a parent and someone's child. When I put the pieces of my experience together, they'll always just be that, pieces. But because I have compassion, I listen to what people say about their experience. And when they tell me how they'd like to be treated, I take notes and I try my hardest. If you are white and autistic like me, you will undoubtedly attract the attention of police for the way you naturally behave. Our stimming, anxiety, and lack of eye contact are perceived as dishonesty. our sensory sensitivities, difficulty understanding and responding to instructions under pressure, our unpredictable movements, the way we seek out unusual things that relate to our special interests, how we put our hands in our pockets so nobody can see us stimming. Everything about an autistic looks suspicious to the uninitiated, especially in a stressful situation. One time, I was stopped at a traffic checkpoint and had a flashlight shown in my eyes. While I was shaking and stuttering, the officer asked if I was on any drugs and asked me to get out of the vehicle to walk in a straight line. It was terrifying. Luckily, another officer saw me and asked if I took any medication that would make my eyes dilate. So while avoiding eye contact with my hands in my pockets, I explained that I took Adderall. They all had a good laugh and I got away safely. Another time, I was looking for native plants in a hiking trail, wearing military surplus bags of camera lenses. Native plants were my special interest and I was photographing them. So when I emerged in a clearing, I was immediately surrounded by police. Apparently an NFL team was training there and they thought I looked suspicious, so they searched my bags, and as soon as I was allowed, I ran away without looking back. I got to go home that night. For white autistics, getting stopped by police is inevitable. It's almost a rite of passage. We can talk about the many times we were sent home, traumatized, but nonetheless lived to tell the tale. Now imagine how this might pay out for a black autistic, face to face with a white police officer with PTSD and his own racial bias. You can have all the money in the world, but when you're confronted by police, privilege has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that your skin color could mean the difference between politeness and brutality, a ticket or an arrest, life or death. So if you want to be an ally, you need to take this knowledge and let it really sink in. I want you to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that white privilege is not a politically correct buzzword, it is real. You need to get angry that autistics like you, mothers of autistic children like you, churchgoers like you, human beings like you are scared. This is real life for them and they're tired of the false promises and betrayal by so-called allies. So being an ally is not about checking on your black friends to see if they're okay. It is about boosting their voices and speaking up on their behalf when necessary. It's about offering your friends support, but giving them space and time to process. Being an ally means never speaking over black people, Being an ally means that you never speak over black people or pretend that you know what it feels like to be in their shoes. I wouldn't want a non-autistic person telling me what it's like to be autistic, and you wouldn't want a stranger to write your autobiography. So don't co-opt blackness as your own experience. Being an ally is about listening to and lifting up black voices, learning from those individual experiences as you go. It's about combining that knowledge with your own resources and privilege and using it to educate other white people. Yes, even your relatives when they air their problematic views. This is scary, but you can do this. Being an ally is about using your privilege to help black folks succeed. It means recommending your black colleagues for promotions and pointing out their good work that goes unnoticed. Black-white inequality is worse today than it was in the year 2000. Do everything in your power to correct that. Being an ally also isn't about perfection. It's a moving target and depends upon the individual black people in your lives that you hope to support, such as the people in your industry or community. There's no universally agreed upon right way to be an ally to black people, which brings me to my next point. Black lives do matter, every single one, and not just the nice ones who meet your standards. Intersectionality is a tangled web of identities, disabilities, and privileges, and you won't understand or agree with everyone. But if you do say Black Lives Matter, you need to be inclusive of all black people. The mass of peaceful protesters and the small handful of looters. Every single one of those black lives will matter tomorrow. Those black lives will matter when the dust is settled too. Will you be an ally then?
Okay. So those were really poignant advice from Steve, who has autism. He wasn't able to join us, But just as I bear privilege of not having a disability, he, he just absolutely blew me away. And he shared that he wasn't able to present because of anxiety. And so I said, so we worked together, and I said, well, Steve, I said, I really want your point of view to come across. And I said, do you want to present something in writing and I read it? And he was like, and I said, or can you pre-record it and we run it? And so that is exactly what it takes. As we work to accommodate people with disabilities, we have to work to build bridges, and we have to work, especially white people, when we are not in the room, we need you to speak truth to power in those situations. When you are in circles where the room is lily white, and and then at the end you all look around and say, oh, you know what, this looks bad, let's call so and so so that it can look better. We don't need to be brought in as tokens. We need to be always at the table so that we can plan and we can mobilize and we can push forward together. I know that we went through a lot. I do want to, I know we're all processing. Can we open it up for maybe 2 questions, if any, or feedback, if anyone just has thoughts they want to share? We maybe have time for maybe 2. Okay. Okay. What we'll do then, I think that everyone, if you're like me, processing it. I've been at this, my son is 21 since he was 3. And I have, no, since he was 2. And I've never had this discussion and never been through it. And so I know that I'm processing, and I thank each and every one of you all for joining us today. And I also wanted to remind us that we are going to move forward and have a session tonight. And we'll also, of course, hear from Steve again tonight. We'll have a mom who has a 7-year-old son with autism and Fragile X, and she's in Virginia. Eric Evans is an autism self-advocate, and he talks frequently with police on how to interact with Black people with autism, and he's going to share with us. Also, another member of Mindworth Collaborative, Ty, will be here to share about the work that organization is doing with Black and Brown families during this time. And then finally, another parent voice who will join us is Deborah Vines. Deborah is the founder and CEO of The Answer, which is autism advocacy organization right outside of Chicago. She was featured in PBS's series on autism in transition, and she shared her story of navigating life with her son and how she and her husband started a advocacy organization primarily for families of color. So tonight will be an awesome session. If you can make it, we'd love for you to have us. But if not, if you could share that with others. Also, we want this to be the first of many sessions. I am going to make sure that I send out a survey to everyone tomorrow to get some ideas on what you thought about today's session, how we can continue to move things forward, and just any feedback and thoughts that you have. Thank you all again for joining us today. And my heart is full. I feel like it's one thing when I'm going through, but when I know that so many people are wanting to make sure that we join forces in solidarity to address this issue and to have these awkward conversations, then that makes it all worthwhile. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful day. Let's be good to each other, and let's be kind to one another.
Hey, Kim, can I say something real fast?
Sure.
I was just going to, I wanted to tell the parents, thank you. I know as a parent, parenting is hard as it is, but as you mentioned at the beginning, you know, there are several variables, not just autism or special needs or other abilities, but also being Black, African-American, and having that. I have a family I'm very close with that I've worked with and have since stayed in contact with, whose son is now 22, and having that conversation with her baby. I have stayed in contact, help her advocate, because not unlike these parents, they are amazing advocates. But it is our, I'll speak for myself, my responsibility as her counterpart to speak up and help them so that we can continue, like you said earlier, making it really truly a united front, not just like the young man was saying, social media, hashtag, it's much more than that. But I think it's beyond thank you to the parents and for you for bringing this together. So
thank you, Carrie.
All right, Kim, how can we financially support you in this work?
You know, Marie, let's talk, let's strategize. I would love to have some thought partners to kind of share with you where I am, and to kind of build the vision going forward. This started out, as you know, Marie, COVID hit, and I was so just disenchanted by the voices that were coming from the disability community. It all focused on state and federal mandates. In other words, when it came to disabilities, what can we do to make sure that we don't get sued? And I was like, that's crazy. And so I started Tuesday Talks to just kind of mobilize us during COVID. Of course, none of us saw George Floyd and this movement coming. And so I wanted to just kind of open the dialogue, and I'd love to talk further, and I'll add that to the survey. What should we be doing to kind of move this forward?
Okay, thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you all so much. As you know, this is being recorded, as well as this evening session's recorded. And I will be following up with the survey. And if, as you're thinking of things, let's just kind of keep the dialogue going. I think that we are on to something. And it's funny because one of our speakers this evening, he couldn't make it today because he's going to be on a similar talk with another trio of autism advocates in another part of the country. So I think that there's some mobilizing that's going on. And so if we use this opportunity, we can really start a movement, and we can really make a difference. So, so I'm excited, and I thank you all once again for joining us. And Kim Settlers, yes, please share the recording with other professionals. Absolutely. We want to share this, and we want to continue to move it forward. This is the first dialogue, but not the last. Thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.